Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we are previewing the Central Division for the 2024-2025 season. Guys, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you subscribe down below, youtube.com/NHL on I-80 Sports, and drop a comment down below. Let us know what you guys think of the Central Division this year. Who's the team to beat and who's looking worse on paper? Let us know. Drop a like if you also like our content as well. Hit the bell notification for everything going on lately. We're going to be posting previews once a week going into the NHL season, and then it's off to the races from there. So if you want to know when our videos drop, hit the bell notification and subscribe. You lose nothing by doing so. And make sure that you follow us on X at I80_SportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are. We're doing this show, maybe one of the first times we've ever done it in the morning, but I kind of like it. So we're here to preview the Central Division today.
It's weird that we're doing it in the morning. This is like the first time I actually have like a cup of coffee while we go and do this.
Yeah, doing it before I go to the gym, believe it or not.
Doing it before I go to the gym. Look at that. We could be like gym buddies in that regard. But we're not here to talk about our gym regimen or our morning routines. We're here to talk about the Central Division in the NHL. So off to the races, away we go. Let's talk first about some additions and subtractions throughout the Central Division. Starting with the Chicago Blackhawks. Some key additions here: Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, Laurent Brossoit, Alec Martinez, TJ Brody, Ilya Mikheyev, Craig Smith, and Patrick Maroon, with key subtractions in Tyler Johnson, Nikita Zaitsev, Taylor Radish, Rem Pitlick, Reese Johnson, Jared Tenorti, Colin Blackwell, Jacob Magna, and Mackenzie Entwistle. Looking at Colorado here, key additions for the Colorado Avalanche: Oliver Shillington, Parker Kelly, Calvin DeHaan, Jacob McDonald, TJ Tynan, Matthew Phillips, and Cale Rosen. Key subtractions here in Yakov Trenin, Zach Parise, Andrew Cogliano, Jack Johnson, Pavel Francouz, Brandon Duhaime, and Ivan Prosvetov. Also, one thing I should mention as well is it's still not known if the Colorado Avalanche are even going to have Valeri Nichushkin this year, given his difficulties trying to, stay in the league last year. We'll leave it at that, just to make sure we're not saying any kind of trigger words for, anything on YouTube and fun stuff like that. If you're curious, look it up yourself. Over to the Dallas Stars, some key additions for the Dallas Stars here: Ilya Lyubushkin, Matt Dumba, Casey DeSmith, Brendan Smith, Colin Blackwell, and Magnus Hellberg. Key subtractions in Joe Pavelski, Chris Tanev, Ryan Suter, Radek Faksa, Yanni Hakampa. Sorry about that. I almost said Santeri Hakampa, but that's a completely different player, Santeri Hataka. Craig Smith, Ty Dellandrea, and backup goaltender Scott Wedgwood. To the Minnesota Wild, key additions here: Yakov Trenin, Jacob Lauko, Graham Clark, Travis Boyd, and Devin Shore, with key subtractions in Alex Goligoski, Mason Shaw, Vinny Lettieri, Dakota Mermis, and Jake Lucchini. Over to the Nashville Predators, who pretty much all they did was add. Key additions here: Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea, Scott Wedgwood, David Edstrom, and Magnus Krona. And now you understand why I'm wearing a Nashville jersey. With key subtractions in Yaroslav Askarov, Jason Zucker, Anthony Beauvillier, Ryan McDonough, Kevin Lankinen, and Kiefer Sherwood. To the St. Louis Blues, key additions here in Dylan Holloway, Philip Broberg, both offer sheets from the Edmonton Oilers. We'll get back to that in a little bit. Also additions in Radek Faksa, Pierre-Olivier Joseph, Ryan Suter, as well, joining the fray as well. I believe Alex Tessier is also on additions there as well for the St. Louis Blues. Key subtractions in Adam Gaudette, Kale Rosen, and Sammy Blay, and Jacob Vrana. To the Utah Hockey Club. I am not used to saying that yet. To the Utah Hockey Club, key additions here: John Marino, Mikhail Sergachev, Ian Cole, Kevin Connaughton, Kevin Stenland, Andrew Agazzino. And yeah, I think that was about it. Key subtractions in Travis Boyd, Josh Brown, Cameron Crotty, Nathan Smith, and Justin Kirkland. And finally, the Winnipeg Jets, key additions there: Jarrett Anderson Dolan, Dylan Coghlan, and Braden Yeager, with key subtractions in Rutger McGrody and Brendan Smith. Also, key subtraction in addition, I'll say there, key subtraction for the Winnipeg Jets is former head coach Rick Bowness, with a key addition in new head coach Scott Arniel. We'll get back to that thought as well. But Tom, a lot of kind of moving and shaking within the Central Division. I noticed like one thing when just kind of going down the list was there was almost kind of like a lot of like in the division moves a little bit, and the smaller moves within the division were almost like going from like team to team in the Central Division. Obviously, like a lot of the bigger moves that we're about to talk about occurred with players coming from outside the division, but I kind of found it kind of curious of like all the smaller moves of just player swapping throughout. But let's talk a little bit about some of our favorite moves of this past offseason in the Central Division. So, Tom, I've done enough talking to start with. So, what were some of your favorite moves across the division?
Well, it's funny. As we know, Nashville was the one who made the big splashes. You brought in Stamkos. You brought in March. So you brought in Brady Shea. Now, like I said, this is a copycat league. So what they are trying to do is kind of emulate what teams in the southern no-tax states did, which is load it up to try to win a championship. Vegas did it. Florida did it. You could say, for argument's sake, Tampa did it too, but most of Tampa's core was homegrown. Obviously, when Tampa won their 2 cups, you had guys like McDonough there, but the majority of their core for those teams were homegrown guys. You want to say you like what Nashville did, yes. But at the same time, I don't know if it makes them better. Yes, I don't know if this, tips the, makes them a Stanley Cup champion. I don't know if this, tips the odometer to make them a Cup champion. I'm looking for a better word here. I don't have it. And I just think about it, and I'm going, okay, it's a copycat league. It's always been. Everybody wants to emulate what the other teams do to win. And I just wonder if Nashville is finally the team that they go and do this, but it just doesn't happen. Now, obviously, like I said, the moves make them better. Stamkos and March or so, it's going to help them out. But, like I said, Brady Shea, I don't think was worth that deal. And I think somewhere down the line, these moves are really going to hurt them and are really going to bite them. And I only say it because I remember this as a Ranger fan back in 2007 when they brought in Gomez and Drury to a core that already had Jaromir Jagr and Brendan Shanahan and Henrik Lundqvist and Martin Straka. And Sean Avery as well, if you want to throw him in the mix as well. And a lot of us at the time thought that this was going to bring them to the next level. This was going to bring them a Stanley Cup. These guys, there'd be a parade down Broadway in the summer of 2008, and it didn't happen that way. The team was good. They made the playoffs. They won a series. They should have probably hung it with Pittsburgh in the second series that they lost, but that was it. And as much as I like these moves, I kind of foresee that happening with Nashville, where I don't know if they're going to be a one round and out, team. I see them maybe making the finals, if not this year, maybe next year. But I don't think that this is long-term going to bring a cup to the Music City. I also like what Chicago did. Chicago brought in a lot of core guys to help out Connor Bedard. I like that they brought in Tyler Bertuzzi. I like that they brought in Teuvo Teravainen. I like that they brought in Alec Martinez to, be that anchor on D. Alec Martinez is a playoff-tested guy. I like bringing in Craig Smith and Pat Maroon for your bottom 6. It's going to make them better. Really is going to make them better. Now, obviously, it's Connor Bedard's team. There's no doubt about that. None of these guys are stars, but these are great role guys and great guys to plug into positions to make that team a little bit better than they were last year. Now, like I said about San Jose in our Pacific Division preview, I do not think the Blackhawks are going to make the playoffs this year. But I do think the Blackhawks are going to be a lot better than they were. And I think the Blackhawks might be sniffing around that second wild card spot. I don't think they'll get it, but I don't think the Blackhawks are going to be the cellar dwellers that they were the prior year and last year. I think the Blackhawks are going to be much improved last year by bringing these guys in to help out Bedard.
Yeah, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with a lot of my thoughts, but I really do like what a lot of teams did in the Central Division, maybe minus Minnesota, but we'll get back to that thought, as well as maybe Winnipeg. Nashville has put the league on notice with the additions of Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, and Jonathan Marchessault. Those three moves alone are favorites of mine, like across the entire NHL. However, I still think Nashville is still just a small ways away from a Stanley Cup. I don't think we need to be, calling them Stanley Cup favorites just yet. It is all going to depend on how this team kind of plays together from the jump of the NHL season. One move that's also not being talked about enough with the Nashville Predators is the switch in backup goaltending for them. They're going from having Kevin Lankinen as their backup goaltender to Juuse Saros to now Scott Wedgwood. Scott Wedgwood is a playoff-proven backup, and I think gives Nashville a little bit more legitimacy behind Juuse Saros and not an automatic win whenever Kevin Lankinen would have been in. So I like the smaller moves that Nashville made as well. However, they are still going to need to compete with Colorado. They are still going to need to compete with Dallas, and it's a not so easy task. Colorado improved slightly, although they didn't really need to improve that much. We're going to get back to that thought too. Beyond what Nashville did of like talking about favorite moves within the Central Division, I really like what Utah did in committing to improving their blue line. They added the likes of John Marino in a trade with New Jersey, and they added the likes of Mikhail Sergachev in a deal with Tampa, taking advantage of the fact that Tampa is a little bit more cap-strapped recently. A thought that we're definitely going to get to once we get to the Atlantic Division preview next week. But Utah, I think their blue line has now solidified to the point where they're up there in top 4 defensemen in the Central Division. In my thought, they're up there, especially on the defenseman side. Honorable mention to Chicago. I really like how they are building around Connor Bedard, as well as adding some youth as well. Had the second overall pick this past year. They took Artemi Leshunov, future maybe number 1 defenseman there for the Chicago Blackhawks. And I also like what St. Louis did by cashing in on Edmonton's cap struggles by offer sheeting not 1 but 2 of their players in Dylan Holloway, former first-round pick, and Philip Broberg, another former first-round pick. All good additions there for St. Louis. A lot of little moves there for St. Louis too, but is it going to be the difference maker? We're just going to have to see, which is a good segue to which team's looking better, which team's looking a little bit worse. I don't know if really there's any team that's truly looking worse in the Central Division this year. But Tom, tell me your thoughts. Who's looking better? Who's looking worse?
Well, obviously, I mean, I made it obvious before. I like what Nashville did. Well, I mean, I don't know if I like what Nashville did, but it's kind of obvious what Nashville did is going to make them better. Chicago, obviously. You did mention Utah before, and I failed to mention them, and I apologize. I like what they did to improve their back line. I think it makes them a little bit better than they were last year playing as the Arizona Coyotes. But at the same time, I see them and Seattle as very similar teams. Teams that are going to have that good defensive play, that by committee scoring, but I'm just not so sure it's going to get them where they need to be as far as a playoff team unless somebody really falls off. After that, it's kind of the haves and the have-nots. Colorado did lose a lot, but Colorado kind of has 2 asterisks here with them. You have, obviously, Nichushkin has his issues. Maybe he'll be back, maybe not. There's still rumblings about Gabe Landeskog playing again. We don't know. He didn't play 2 years ago. He didn't play last year. They're saying he may be ready to go this year. But who knows? They've been saying that for a while. He's the captain of that team. But with the Avalanche, it's really right now, what do they want to do? Do you want to keep going for it? Everybody, including myself, thought this was going to be the next dynasty. Do you really want to keep going for it, or do you want to say, hey, listen, Nathan McKinnon is going to be 30 this year. Cale Makar is in his mid-20s. Do we want to maybe, I'm not saying blow it up for a year, but maybe concentrate on scouting players, developing players, bringing players in, a la kind of what Pittsburgh did, in the mid-2000s, where they shed a lot of their veteran guys and wound up winning 2 cups in a row. And I am wondering if they're just going to say, hey, why don't we just, forget this? Let's shed some of these guys. Let's get rid of some veteran talent. Let's make sure we draft well. Let's make sure we develop prospects. Let's see if there's any other prospects available that other teams want to get rid of. And let's spend a year or two, a la what Pittsburgh did and what Boston did, even though it didn't result in any cups, to get back to a Stanley Cup somewhere down the line in the next few years. Because right now, Colorado, it's a big question mark. You get away from the teams that I spoke about just now. Dallas is Dallas. They're still great. But after that, everybody else, it's kind of just, the same. It's all the same. It's everybody kind of, okay, you swapped player A with player B. It doesn't really move the needle for me with any of them. I guess it's just, a Midwestern thing, bland, like the Midwest is. Sorry to all our Midwestern viewers, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it. I don't think anybody looks like obviously worse, but outside of the moves that Nashville made and outside of the moves that Chicago made, it's kind of just the same recycled thing with these other teams.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I'll dig a little bit deeper into a few of these other teams kind of going in. One thing I do want to mention before I continue on with who was better or worse on paper for me, I mentioned before that with St. Louis Blues and additions and subtractions that they added Pierre-Olivier Joseph. It was actually Matthew Joseph that they added. So I misspoke on that one. Just want to mention that for any listeners out there. But moving back to who looks better or worse on paper in the Central Division, obviously Nashville looks better. I mean, but so does most of the division. It's just Nashville that probably made the biggest additions on paper and the biggest improvements on paper. That top 6 is now solidified with Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault joining the fray, and Brady Shea joining the top 4 defensemen in Nashville as well. I really think on paper that Utah and Chicago look better, albeit with question marks. I mean, I'm not ready to crown Utah and Chicago potential playoff busters, but Chicago, I don't think is going to be an absolute bottom dweller this year. The additions of Tyler Bertuzzi, as well as, I don't want to misspeak on this one, the additions of guys like Tyler Bertuzzi, as well as Teuvo Teravainen, a really nice reunion there. And even adding guys like Craig Smith and Ilya Mikheyev, they pretty much fortified that right wing spot, where there were a lot of question marks last year. Hopefully they get a full year out of Taylor Hall as well. And if they do, you've got a top line of Taylor Hall, Connor Bedard, and Tyler Bertuzzi, which we'll get to once we actually look at the lineups via Daily Faceoff. That's a really nice first line for a developing team. And I think that could really help Connor Bedard maybe reach that next level in the NHL as well. Colorado did not need to do much to their lineup to stay as competitive as they have been. Same with Dallas. However, with Colorado, there are going to be some question marks at goaltender. Alexander Georgiev has been streaky as of recently. And although about a year and a half ago, we were ready to crown him as an elite level goaltender in the NHL, I don't think he's really that elite level goaltender that he once was. However, sitting right behind him is backup goaltender Justus Annunen, who I think could make the case this year to maybe start taking some starting roles in bigger games towards the end of this season for Colorado, if he starts playing really, really well. For Dallas, they didn't need to do too much either, but they did need to fill some blank spots left by the likes of Chris Tanev and Joe Pavelski. With Joe Pavelski, the easy fix there is give more minutes to Wyatt Johnston or Logan Stankoven. That's your easy fix right there. Logan Stankoven, who really took a big leap last year in his play. In regards to Chris Tanev, though, and replacing his production and replacing him as a mid-season upgrade, Dallas took a cheap option at Matt Dumba, and I actually really like that move for Dallas. I think it's going to keep Dallas competitive. I think it's going to keep Dallas at the top of the Central. Moving on to some other teams of like better or worse. Although I like what St. Louis did, I'm not so sure they are better on paper. But time will tell. I mean, St. Louis, I think, could definitely give some teams in the Central Division some difficulty. but they're definitely going to be bottom 4 in the division for me. Minnesota did not need to do a lot yet, given their commitment to getting younger and trying to clock out the cap problems that they've had over the past few years. After this year, I think we're going to see Jesper Wallstedt maybe start taking over at goaltending duties, even though they still have Philip Gustafsson and Marc-Andre Fleury. But Minnesota is committing to trying to getting younger, and you can definitely see it once we get to the daily faceoff projections. And lastly, Winnipeg. Winnipeg is tough for me to peg on paper because even though they're still absolutely a team to beat in the Central, I'm not sure that they're better than either Colorado, Dallas, or Nashville. I think that they still need 1 or 2 more moves that they need to make during the season to really push them over the edge of maybe possibly being a playoff team this upcoming year. If they can make a move or 2 to improve that defense, because I think that's kind of the glaring issue at the moment, that may convince me otherwise of them maybe being a 3rd or 4th place team. It's also going to depend on how well new head coach Scott Arniel can push this lineup early on. Rick Bowness really knew how to get the best out of Winnipeg's lineup over the last 2 seasons. We got to see what Scott Arniel can do at the helm for the Winnipeg Jets. But I've talked a lot about like what some lineups are looking like and how some lineups are going to project. So I think that is time for the perfect segue to look at the lineups brought to you by, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on my words. Brought to you by Daily Faceoff. There we go. So looking at Chicago first, and I know our heads might be a little bit in the way, but I'm going to do my best to kind of scroll on through so that way everybody can see. Trying a new format as well to see if viewers can kind of see this a little bit better. If you're curious about the lineups that you want to see for your teams, go to dailyfaceoff.com and look at the line combinations as well. I will also just be going through the forward combos and the defense combos and the starting goaltenders. I will not be going through power play and penalty kill units. If you are curious about that, please visit dailyfaceoff.com. So looking at the Chicago Blackhawks first, on the top line, we've got Taylor Hall with Connor Bedard and Tyler Bertuzzi. And on the second line, Lucas Reichel with Philip Kurashev and Teuvo Teravainen. On the third line, Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, and Ilya Mikheyev. And on the fourth line, Andreas Athanasiou, Ryan Donato, and Craig Smith. Looking at the defense, on the first pairing, Alex Vlasic with Seth Jones. On the second pairing, Kevin Korchinski with Connor Murphy. And on the third pairing, Alec Martinez with TJ Brody. So we've got a nice new combination there for the Chicago Blackhawks. Looking down at the goaltending, we've got starting goaltender Peter Mrazek with backup goaltender Laurent Brossoit. Going on up now to the Colorado Avalanche. On the first line, Jonathan Drouin, Nathan MacKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen. On the second line, Miles Wood, Casey Middlestat, and Nikolai Kovalenko. On the third line, Joel Kiviranta, Ross Colton, and Logan O'Connor. And on the fourth line, Parker Kelly and Chris Wagner and Jason Polin. One thing it should be mentioned is Arturi Lankinen, who normally figures into the top 6 or top 9 of this lineup, is currently out with an injury. He is likely going to start the season on IR. So something to keep tucked into that back pocket. And it's still left to be seen if Gabriel Landeskog is going to come back as well. Looking at the defense, Devin Taves with Cale Makar makes up the top pairing. On the second pairing, Samuel Girard with Josh Manson. And on the third pairing, another new pairing here, Eric Brandstrom with Oliver Shillington. And the goaltending tandem, as I mentioned before, we've got Alexander Georgiev and Justice Anunin. And moving on forward, we've got the Dallas Stars. So top line, Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, and Wyatt Johnston. On the second line, Mason Marchment, Matt Duchene, and Tyler Seguin. On the third line, Jamie Benn, Maverick Bourque, and Logan Stankoven. And on the fourth line, Evgeny Dodonov, Sam Steele, and Colin Blackwell. Looking at the defense, on the first pairing, Miro Heiskanen and Matt Dumba. On the second pairing, Thomas Harley with Ilya Lyubushkin. And on the third pairing, Esa Lindell with Nils Lundqvist. And looking down at the goaltending, starting goaltender is going to be Jake Ottinger. And backing up is new backup goaltender Casey DeSmith. Going on down now, we've got to go down a little bit further to the Nashville Predators.
Oh, whoops.
Looking at the top line, Philip Forsberg with Ryan O'Reilly and Gustav Nyquist. On the second line, Steven Stamkos with Tommy Novak and Jonathan Marchessault. On the third line, Mark Jankowski, Colton Sissons, and Luke Evangelista. And on the fourth line, Cole Smith with Michael McCarron and Juuso Parssinen. Defensive pairings for the Nashville Predators. On the top pairing, Brady Shea with Roman Josi. On the second pairing, Jeremy Lauzon with Alexander Carrier. And on the third pairing, Spencer Stastny with Luke Schenn. Looking at the goaltending, starting goaltender is Drew Saros with backup goaltender Scott Wedgwood.
We skipped Minnesota. We got to go back to them.
Whoop, my bad. Didn't mean to skip over them. I mean,
not much to see there, but
I was about to say, I don't know if that's indicative for our feelings on them, but oh well. So looking at the top line for the Minnesota Wild. Thank you, Tom. Looking at the top line here, Kirill Kaprizov with Ryan Hartman and Mats Zuccarello. And on the second line, Marcus Johansson with Joel Eriksson Ek and Matt Boldy. On the third line, Marcus Foligno, Marco Rossi, and Yakov Trenin. And on the fourth line, Jacob Lauko, Kusnadinov. I did practice that one before we recorded. Kusnadinov. And on the right wing of the fourth line, Frederick Gaudreau. Looking at the defensive pairing, Jacob Middleton and Brock Faber are the top pairing. On the second pairing, Jonas Brodin and Jared Spurgeon. And on the third pairing, Declan Chisholm and Zach Bogosian. Goaltending tandem is Philip Gustafson and Marc-Andre Fleury. Thank you for letting me know I missed Minnesota on that one. Like I said, may or may not be indicative by how we think they're going to finish in the standings. We'll get back to that one. To the St. Louis Blues, on the top line, Jake Neighbors, Robert Thomas, and Jordan Kyrou. On the second line, Brandon Saad, Pavel Buchnevich, and Braden Shen. On the third line, a pretty brand new third line here, if I've ever seen one, Dylan Holloway, Radek Faksa, and Matthew Joseph. And on the fourth line, Alexander Tessier, Zachary Dean, and Alexei Toropchenko. One thing that should be mentioned as well as we look at the injuries, Torrey Krug is going to be out for quite a while from what I remember, and I'm not sure how long Oscar Sundqvist is going to be out. So Oscar Sundqvist could eventually factor into this lineup as well. To the defense for the St. Louis Blues, Scott Perunovich with Colton Parayko. On the second pairing, Philip Broberg with Justin Falk. And on the third pairing, Nick Leddy with Ryan Suter. And the goaltending for the St. Louis Blues, Jordan Binnington is your starting goaltender with Joel Hofer as your backup. Wearing the classic jersey for Joel Hofer as well. St. Louis Blues legend Martin Brodeur actually wore number 30. I don't know if you knew that though.
Oh yeah, he was one of the best goalies ever had.
To the Utah Hockey Club. Again, I'm not used to saying that. So, to the Utah Hockey Club, the top line, Clayton Keller, Barrett Hayton, and Nick Schmaltz. The second line is Lawson Krause, Logan Cooley, and Dylan Gunther. Third line, Matthias Michelli, Nick Bukestad, and Josh Doan. And the fourth line, Kevin Stenlund, Jack McBain, and Alex Kerfoot. To the defense, first pairing is Mikhail Sergachev and Sean Durzi. Second pairing is Jussi Valimaki and John Marino. And the third pairing is Ian Cole and Michael Kesselring. The goaltending for Utah this year is Connor Ingram and Karel Vejmelka. So now, finally rounding this out, we're looking at the Winnipeg Jets. So on the top line, Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Gabriel Velarde. On the second line, Nikolai Ehlers, Vladislav Nemestikov, and Cole Perfetti. On the third line, Nino Niederreiter, Adam Lowry, and Mason Appleton. And on the fourth line, Morgan Barron, Rasmus Kupari, and Alex Iafallo. To the defensive pairings, on the top pairing, Josh Morrissey with Dylan DeMello. On the second pairing, Dylan Sandberg and Neil Pionk. And on the third pairing, Colin Miller with Logan Stanley. And looking at the goaltending pairing, we've got Connor Hellebuck with new backup goaltender Capo Kakinen. So a lot to take in there looking at these lineups. But Tom, here's what my question is for you. Based on, what these lineup projections are, which they're not final lineup projections. This is just if the season started today, this is what it would be. Which lineup looks the strongest? Which one looks the weakest in your mind? So go for it.
I mean, in my mind, as much as what Nashville and Chicago did, as much as I liked what they did, I still think Dallas is the strongest, if you ask me. Dallas is still, they're good at spreading their depth out. They have a good mix of young talent and veteran players. I look at lines 1 through 4. Those lines all look pretty strong. I look at their D. Their D looks fairly strong as well. Their goaltending, still strong. Jake Ottinger is one of the best in the league. But it's something I had mentioned about Carolina, and I think when we talk about them, I think the well is dried up a little bit with Carolina. But I had mentioned those old San Jose Sharks teams that were always fairly strong but never won. And now after last year, when they depended a little too much on a veteran in Joe Pavelski in the playoffs and didn't get to the finals when many people thought that they would and maybe even take a cup, are the footsteps going to get louder and louder this year for the Dallas Stars? Because Pavelski is gone now. So it takes away from their depth a little bit, but it's not a glaring loss. I mean, and Pavelski wasn't great in the playoffs last year. He just got bit. He got bit by the age bug. But I look at Dallas, still a first-place team, still a playoff team, still a contender. But this year, I think you're going to start hearing the footsteps with Dallas, with other teams out in the Pacific, teams in the West, teams in the East, other cup contenders. Where is it going to get to a point where if Dallas doesn't get to the finals this year or doesn't win a cup, is it going to get to a point where it's going to become to the point where, okay, now we got to think about what are we going to do with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin and Matt Duchene? Is it time to start dumping these veteran guys if the team doesn't win a cup this year? Because I think last year and the prior year, a lot of people thought they would take it, and 2 consecutive Western Conference final losses in a row had a lot of people scratching their head. There's a lot of people out there who thought they should have beat Edmonton last year, and they didn't. And the depth that they said was so great was beat by a team with less depth, but 2 better superstars than them. I still think they're the best team in the division, but like I said, the footsteps are going to start getting louder. Nashville obviously got stronger. Chicago obviously got stronger. But if you ask me, Minnesota right now is the weakest team in this division. I literally I look at the Wild right now. You still have Kirill the Thrill. You still have Zook. You still have Ryan Hartman. You start getting past that. Matt Boldy has gotten better over the years. Marcus Foligno, he's a shoo-in with the Wild. But I look up and down here. The D is nothing to write home about. The goaltending, it's you still have Marc-Andre Fleury there, who they might want to trade at the deadline if they can get something for him. But I look at the Wild, and it's the same glaring thing in Minnesota over the years. We're the state of hockey. We can get anybody to show up. Obviously, the state tournament and the goal for hockey is more important than professional hockey there. And with their cap issues and just with the overall feeling of, we have no pressure to do anything here. This is what Minnesota is now. It's a weak team. I don't see this team better than anybody else in this division right now.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with Minnesota on this one real quick. I feel like with Minnesota, this is a temporary bottom dweller team in the Central Division. It's almost like bottom dweller by association almost. It's more so like by committee, because Chicago did quite a bit to improve this year that I don't think they're in the basement this year. At least I don't think. It's going to bar some injuries for Chicago. For Minnesota, though, they're only bottom dwelling right now because they're developing their youth at the moment, and they're trying to restructure this team for the future. So that way, when teams like Dallas and Colorado and Winnipeg are in their twilight, Minnesota can jump them at that point. And I think within that window of like 2 to 3 years, I think we could see Minnesota start making a resurgence again. Once you've got your core locked in with Kaprizov, with Brock Faber, with, I said Kaprizov already. So Kaprizov, Faber, Rossi, Boldy, and then add into the mix potential starting goaltender over the next 3 years, Jesper Wallstedt. I think we could see the division slowly start to flip on its head. For this year, though, Minnesota is my de facto bottom dweller team looking at the projections. Dallas and Colorado are still the teams to beat in my mind. I mean, Colorado definitely has their share of question marks. They definitely have their share of some issues in there. However, Colorado is still absolutely one of the best teams in the league. Dallas is still up there, but as Tom mentioned before, I'm wondering if the knocking on the door is starting to get louder for Dallas, given that this team is starting to age, this team is starting to, be like, all right, are we going to do this or are we not? I still think Dallas is one of my favorites to win the Stanley Cup this year. However, they've got teams like Nashville and Winnipeg that are also right on their tails as well. Don't underestimate some of the rest of the teams in this division, though. Utah should not be overlooked whatsoever. I could see Utah, especially if they get off to a hot start, could do really, really well. We looked at that lineup, and they've got a young lineup with some ability. They just re-signed Dylan Guenther to a 7-year deal, and he's locked into their core going forward. They've got a really, really talented core going forward, surrounded by Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz, I literally just said their names: Logan Cooley, Dylan Guenther, Barrett Hayton, all guys that I think could really, really take bigger steps forward this year. And then add in the mix that you even still have younger guys like Josh Doan that are starting to make some noise in the league as well. I think Utah has a lot to prove this year in their first year in Utah, and kind of proving that they belong, because they didn't belong in Arizona. So they've got to belong in Utah. So that's kind of my thoughts. I really think that if I was saying like the 4 teams to beat in the Central Division right now, it's Dallas, Colorado, Nashville, Winnipeg. And then Utah's not too far behind. St. Louis is in that mix as well. As like, don't overlook this team, but they're just kind of in that wishy-washy, just like they're right in between like being pretty good to pretty okay. And then Chicago's taking a step forward, but I don't think they're competitive just yet. I think they're going to make some noise. I think they're going to be a fun team to watch, but they're not quite ready for prime time just yet. But let's project the standings from 1 to 8. Who's ending in first place? Who's ending in last place? Tom, let's start with you. Who's in first? Who's in last? And everybody else in between.
Okay, first place. I'm still going with them. Dallas, first place. Now, I know I really trashed on Colorado, but I'm still putting Colorado in at second place. You still have Nathan McKinnon. You still have Cale McCarr. You still have Mikko Rantanen. You got to see what happens with Landeskog and Nichushkin. Third place, Nashville. Like I said, they made obvious improvements. But at the same time, these improvements, this chemistry for this team to gel, it might take a little while. I think they'll be a playoff team. I think they'll be a shoo-in in that third spot. But I could see them having a little bit of a bumpy road early on. I could see them having some issues early on in October. I definitely could. Fourth place, Winnipeg. You still have your old stalwarts there in Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck. I'm still going Winnipeg in fourth place. I still think Winnipeg makes the playoffs. Fifth place, the much improved Chicago Blackhawks. I think they're going to have a good year this year. I think they're going to have a better year this year. I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs this year, but I do think they'll be sniffing that spot. I do think they'll be sniffing that wild card spot. I think it's going to be real interesting to see when them and San Jose play against each other this year. I think the games will be pretty good. 2 young and upcoming teams. Might not be this year for Chicago. It might be next year, but they're definitely going to have a better year. Okay, following them, Utah Hockey Club. Like I said, I like their D, but I don't like much else. I think the forward core still doesn't scream playoffs to me and still doesn't have enough to get it done. Behind them, 7th place, St. Louis. Now, I think St. Louis and Utah can flip-flop. I really do. Depends on if St. Louis gets healthy or not. Depends on if Jordan Binnington wants to be a goalie or wants to swing a stick at people's heads this year. I don't know. It's just right now with St. Louis, a lot of your core guys are gone. And even if they were, so they're older, Pietrangelo is gone, O'Reilly is gone, Tarasenko is gone. A lot of these guys that led you to that Stanley Cup 5 years ago now, believe it or not, I can't even believe that, are gone. And they're older. And the team never really brought in any upcoming young talent to replace those guys. You don't really know what they're doing in St. Louis. Are they rebuilding? Are they not? Are they trying to make the playoffs because they were sniffing it last year? Are they trying to tank for a draft pick? It's really hard to tell what that team is doing in St. Louis. And I think that they're resting on the laurels of that 2019 Cup just a little too much. I think they're still using that saying, hey, the team sucks, but hey, remember 5 years ago, we never won before. Remember when we won? Remember when we beat Boston? Remember? I still think they're using that to, go to their fans saying, oh, well, it could be worse, but just remember, we finally won the Stanley Cup. And I don't think that's very good. As a Ranger fan, they tried shoving 94 down our throats during the dark ages when they had no organizational plan and kept signing these players and kept shoving 94 in our face without really letting us know. And now we know all these years later that there was a huge problem there behind the scenes with the Rangers. And 8th place, rounding it out, Minnesota. Said what I said about them. It's the same problem in Minnesota. We're the state of hockey. Everyone loves hockey. We play hockey here. Hockey, yeah. But, in the years of the North Stars and the Wild have never even gotten to the finals. The North Stars got to the finals twice and lost. I don't understand why they're so anti-Stanley Cup in Minnesota and anti-building a winner. Other teams in cold weather cities in the Midwest did it. Look at Detroit. Maybe not anymore, but Detroit, Michigan's a hockey state. Boston's a hockey city. They built winners. They didn't care if those players came from Michigan or Massachusetts. They built winners there. And they're not doing it in St. Louis, and they seem perfectly fine with being mediocre. So they're my 8th spot.
Yeah, a lot of our projections are going to be similar, albeit I flip-flopped a few things in here. So taking first place for me this year, however, I don't have them as my Stanley Cup favorite. I just see them potentially winning the regular season. Colorado. And that might be a little bit surprising, but I still see Colorado's firepower completely outweighing the fact that they've got questions, going towards the blue line and looking at goaltending. I still think Colorado is still one of the top teams. And if they stay healthy and they get guys back, they get Arturi Lenkinen back, maybe they get Gabriel Landeskog back, but even then, we don't know what condition he's going to look like at all. But maybe Colorado also makes a trade mid-season as well and does something savvy like they normally do. Sakic has been known to do that. I still think Colorado could very well end in first place. Second place, I've got Dallas right on their tails. I think it's going to go right down to the very last day of the season. We're not going to know who's going to win the Central Division until game 82, I think. I think it's going to come right down to the wire in the Central. Coming in third place, also not going to be too far behind. I think it's going to be Nashville. And then in fourth place, Winnipeg. This is where I could see a little bit of flip-flopping within the top 4. I could see a scenario where Nashville ends in second place. I could see a scenario where Winnipeg ends in third place. There's a lot of variables here, but all 4 of these teams, I think there's a very good chance we see all 4 teams in the Central Division make the playoffs this year. This could be the 4 teams that make the playoffs from the Central. Coming in 5th, and I think they're not going to be too far behind. I think they're only going to be like maybe 1 step behind. Might surprise some people. Utah. I think Utah is better on paper than some people realize that. And I think some players make a significant jump this year. I think Logan Cooley, makes a jump in his sophomore season. I think Dylan Guenther, now that he's gotten his new, fancy contract, I think that he's really ready to make that big next step in the NHL. And if he takes that next big leap, and Clayton Keller also keeps doing Clayton Keller things and doing well, and that's 75 to 85 points, I think Utah can really make some noise this year. I don't know if they're quite a playoff team, but they could be on that bubble. Ending in 6th place, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. I think Chicago's going to be a better team this year overall. I don't think that they're going to be drafting in the top 5 this year, unless they somehow win the lottery. But I don't think Chicago's a basement dweller anymore. Speaking of basement dwellers, the St. Louis Blues could possibly be that, especially if Jordan Binnington is not focused on hockey and focuses more on assault. And yay, fun. And lastly, in last place, I have Minnesota. Like I said, there's a lot that I like coming up in Minnesota. However, I still think that given how talented the rest of the Central Division is, Minnesota's just my de facto last place team. However, I could still see a scenario where St. Louis ends in last and Minnesota ends in 7th. I could potentially understand that scenario. But we're going to round out this episode with our question of the day. Question of the day is easy, and we've already kind of talked about it a little bit. But Tom, which team is the team to beat in the division this year? Who do you think?
I'm going with Dallas, and I'm going with Nashville right now. It really depends on how they start and what growing pains happen with them. Colorado's up there too, but there's just so many question marks with them right now. There's so many question marks with them. It's really going to be difficult because right now, like I said, depending on if Landeskog comes back and if Nichushkin comes back, and if they're at 100%, then yeah, they'll be a lot better. But I look at that team as constructed right now, and even though I predicted them to be in second place, they're just I don't like the depth with Colorado right now. I don't like their depth on forward. So I am going to go with Dallas and Nashville, but I still think Colorado will probably finish in the middle of those two.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Dallas and Nashville are definitely teams to beat in the division. Don't sleep on Colorado, though. I don't think Colorado's time at the top of the division is up just yet, especially based on my projections. And Winnipeg can also make some noise, too. I think those 4 teams are very strong teams in the Western Conference in general this year, and I think are going to give the Western Conference a lot of difficulty looking at Pacific teams that we projected last week as well, which check out that video if you haven't checked it out yet. But what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with our takes? Let us know down below. Hit up the comment section. Who do you think are the teams to beat in the Central Division? What did you think of all the moves? And what did you think of our thoughts? Join the conversation down below and let us know. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe down below, youtube.com/NHL on I-80 Sports. Drop a like as well, and make sure you hit the bell notification so that way you know when our content goes live. We're moving away from the Western Conference after this week. We're moving to the Eastern Conference next week with our Atlantic Division preview, so you don't want to miss it. And if you don't want to miss it, hit the bell notification and subscribe down below. And if you're on next, make sure you follow us at I-80_SportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much because we greatly value all of your support. But time to stop yapping. Time to watch some preseason hockey. But until then, I'm Brian. He's Tom. This has been our Central Division preview here at I-80 Sports.